The Brazilian Senate has approved a bill that paves the way for the privatization of state-owned water and sanitation companies. 1.48 million US citizens applied for unemployment benefits last week as the coronavirus pandemic continues to hit workers hard. Iran's COVID-19 death toll has now surpassed 10,000. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. And we begin in Brazil, where the Senate has approved a bill that paves the way for the privatization of state-owned water and sanitation companies. Our correspondent Brian Meir has the details.
Last night, a bill introduced by a man known as the Coca-Cola senator in Brazil, Tasso Gereissati from the PSDB party, was passed in Brazilian Senate, which will open the door for privatization of Brazil's freshwater reserves, which are the world's largest. Now, companies like Coca-Cola and the meat industry, the beverage industry, have had their eye on Brazil's freshwater reserves for a long time, especially the Guarani subterranean aquifer, which is the world's largest. What this new regulation does is it essentially undoes the landmark 2007 law of basic sanitation that was passed during the Lula administration, which banned privatizations and mandated that all Brazilian citizens had a right to potable water and sewage treatment. Now, despite that law passing, still only about 86% of the Brazilian citizens have access to potable water. But what this new law does is it pushes back the deadline for guaranteeing this right, and it also offers federal aid to municipal governments that want to privatize or deepen privatization of their local public water systems. It's important to note that although there's a growing center-left and center-right coalition of political parties working to oust far-right President Jair Bolsonaro, the only party that unanimously voted against this measure was the PT.
A group of Colombian soldiers is under investigation for the alleged rape of a 12-year-old indigenous girl. The victim, from the Embera Chami community, disappeared from her home in a reserve in the north of the country on Sunday and was found a day later at a nearby school. She told indigenous authorities she had been sexually abused by at least 8 soldiers. The Attorney General's office has launched a probe. This comes just 1 week after the Colombian Congress approved a constitutional reform that seeks to impose life imprisonment for anyone found guilty of the rape or murder of a child under the age of 14.
25 interviews have been conducted with people who may have had knowledge of the occurrence of this sexual act, and the identification of the alleged perpetrators corresponding to 8 members of the National Army has also been achieved.
The Peruvian government and private clinics have reached an agreement on fees for the treatment of COVID-19 patients. The two sides agreed on a tariff of 55,000 soles, approximately $15,600 US plus taxes, for a maximum period of 30 days to treat patients. The Health Ministry explained that the agreement will allow COVID-19 patients to be transferred from public hospitals to private clinics. The agreement was reached after President Martin Vizcarra issued an ultimatum of 48 hours to reach an agreement, or the government would take over private health facilities. Peru is the second hardest hit nation in Latin America and ranks 7th in the world, having reported more than 264,000 coronavirus cases. The Pan American Health Organization warned on Wednesday of recurrent outbreaks of COVID-19 in the Americas over the next 2 years and called on Brazilian authorities to increase testing.
In the absence of effective treatments or a widely available vaccine, we expect that over the next 2 years in the region of the Americas, we will experience recurring COVID-19 outbreaks, which may be interspersed with periods of limited transmission. We must be realistic about the future. All of us must adjust to a new way of life and redefine our sense of normal. The truth is that for many populations in the region, implementing and adhering to public health measures has been challenging. Workers from the informal economy, families living in overcrowded houses, indigenous and Afro-descendant populations living in precarious conditions, and those without access to soap and running water are particularly at risk. This is why it is so important for countries to implement policies and programs that address the issues faced by these vulnerable populations. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated how the most vulnerable in our societies are disproportionately impacted by disease.
Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, has assured the population that the repatriation of nationals does not pose a threat to the public after 39 imported cases of COVID-19 were recently reported.
The 39 new cases of imported COVID-19 have been detected and managed. I emphasize to you that none of these cases is a threat to the community at this time, and that through our identification, tracing, and quarantining process, the Ministry of Health is containing and treating affected persons. The 39 new cases are persons in which in excess of half are returning nationals who entered Antigua and Barbuda by air over the last few days. These nationals are now quarantined and isolated at the government facility at Hawksbill Hotel and will not be released into the community until they test negative. It is important that you know that none of these persons have been hospitalized. Presently, there is no one hospitalized in Antigua and Barbuda with COVID, and none of the new cases require hospitalization. The remaining individuals are in hotel properties which are equipped with facilities to isolate, monitor, and treat these individuals who tested positive for COVID.
And we're taking a very short break now, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. 1.48 million US citizens applied for unemployment benefits last week as applications for jobless aid declined just 5% in the past 2 weeks, a much slower rate of improvement than in April and May. According to the latest report from the US Department of Labor, new unemployment claims have continuously exceeded the 1 million mark for 14 consecutive weeks as a result of the mass layoffs in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. The report notes that 19.5 million workers are still receiving unemployment benefits, even as the nation has begun working to restart the economy. Former US Vice President Joe Biden has reportedly widened his lead to 9 points over President Donald Trump, according to a new poll. According to the CNBC All-America Economic Survey, Biden is in line to win 47% of the vote in the November presidential elections, with Trump standing at 38%. As far as the issues currently gripping the US, Trump maintains a lead when it comes to the economy, while Biden is ahead when it comes to racial equality, police reform, healthcare, and the pandemic.
When a white supremacist walked into Mother Emanuel Church.
The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic could increase drug abuse across the world. In its 2020 World Drug Report, the office predicted an overall increase in drug abuse due to the pandemic, with users likely to shift to cheaper products and injecting them, which carries greater risks. The office warned that countries were also likely to reduce drug-related budgets, which would make it easier for traffickers to operate. The report adds that rising unemployment and a lack of opportunities could increase the chances that poor and disadvantaged people tend to illicit activities linked to drugs.
So the trend in drug abuse and use has been increasing, where we have 269 million people using drugs, which is an increase of 30% if we compare 2018 to 2008. This is a very alarming increase. Not just the increase is in the amount of people using drugs, but there are more youth, adolescents, children using drugs. With lockdowns, we have seen less trafficking between regions, but we have also seen some change in the routes, so people are moving from land trafficking to maritime routes. In Southeast Asia, it hasn't impacted much, because also we have to remember that lockdowns in some countries were just for a few weeks. So while it has slowed down the trafficking, it has caused also a decrease in prices, because there is more available on the local markets. And this is a risk in and of itself, because when it's cheaper and available in more and bigger quantities, then more people are at risk.
In France, trade unions are demanding that President Emmanuel Macron intervene to reopen the Luxfer medical oxygen cylinder factory, which has been closed for a year. Before its closure, this plant was the only one in Europe to manufacture medical oxygen cylinders.
When is this company going to reopen? The state has to move. That's what I said to the mayor, whom I met last Tuesday. And to Mr. Macron, the state must now intervene directly, either through a buyer or by nationalizing this company so that jobs can be found on this site.
The World Health Organization's regional director for Europe announced on Thursday that the continent has seen a surge of COVID-19 cases since countries began easing lockdown restrictions.
Last week, Europe saw an increase in weekly cases for the first time in months. For weeks, I have spoken about the risk of resurgence as countries adjust measures. In several countries across Europe, this risk has now become a reality. 30 countries have seen increases in new cumulative cases over the past 2 weeks. In 11 of these countries, accelerated transmission has led to very significant resurgence that, if left unchecked, will push health systems to the brink once again in Europe.
Chinese authorities have announced that the recent COVID-19 outbreak in Beijing is almost completely under control. However, they've stressed that they will not let their guard down and will keep some preventative measures in place to prevent new outbreaks.
After detecting and isolating 256 COVID-19 cases, the government of Beijing has reassured that the Xinfadi market outbreak in the south part of the city was virtually under control.
The city has comprehensively tracked and isolated close contacts of confirmed cases and taken a number of preventive measures. As a result, infections directly related to the Xinfadi market are now basically under control.
According to the authorities, the rapid response was fundamental in controlling the outbreak, but also gave great importance to the nearly 4 million tests that were done in the city.
Testing is our first line of defense to ensure early detection, early reports, early quarantine, and early treatment of COVID-19 cases, and to detect asymptomatic cases. We will further increase testing efficiency, expand coverage, and test all residents of medium and high-risk areas and all industry personnel, as well as transportation and delivery service personnel.
After the outbreak in the south side of the city, most of the prevention and control measures were re-established in Beijing. The people appreciate the quick control of the outbreak so that they can continue to resume their daily routines.
When the outbreak was detected, we were very worried because the virus is quickly transmitted between people. That is why it was a relief that the outbreak was quickly controlled.
Before the Xinfadi market outbreak, Beijing had not reported new local transmitted cases of COVID-19 in 57 days. But the new outbreak turned on the alarms on the possibility of a second wave of infections. That is why Beijing's authorities warned about the existing challenges and asked to keep some of the main prevention measures in place to ensure the total control of the pandemic. Iramsi Peraza, Telesur, Beijing, China.
Iramsi Peraza, Telesur, Beijing, China.
The Japanese government confirmed on Thursday that it has scrapped the deployment of a multi-billion-dollar missile defense system. Under the costly and controversial program, interceptors for the Aegis Ashore missile defense system were to be placed in 2 regions. However, the government reversed the decision under pressure from local residents concerned about the risks posed by a missile defense system in their backyard. The system, sold to Japan by the United States, was estimated to cost the country $4.2 billion over 3 decades.
So it doesn't really mean...
I said we had to cancel the installment of Aegis Ashore. We found out we couldn't control where the booster would fall. And we promised the local community that we will control where the booster goes down, and we found out we are not able to do that. So we couldn't move ahead with this Aegis Ashore project, so had to cancel it.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Nearly 100 Rohingya asylum seekers from Myanmar, including 30 children, were rescued from a wooden boat off the coast of Indonesia's Sumatra island. Photos taken from Indonesian rescue boats showed dozens of children and adults after they'd been rescued from their vessel by local fishermen. Many had gone without food for several days. Malaysia and Indonesia are favoured destinations for Rohingya fleeing violence in Myanmar, with thousands turning to people smugglers every year.
Initially, our local fishermen found the refugees' boat, which almost sank. Then, we dispatched an evacuation team to rescue them. We understand so far that they consist of 15 men, 49 women, and 30 children. The minors comprise 10 boys and 20 girls.
Iranian authorities reported 134 new COVID-19 fatalities this Thursday, taking the overall death toll past 10,000.
We lost 134 of our compatriots in the past 24 hours, and the total number of victims is 10,130. We call on all our compatriots to follow the health protocols, especially the elderly and those with underlying diseases. We also urge children and young people not to be present in crowded centers.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has officially declared an end to the Ebola epidemic that broke out in the east of the country in August 2018. Over 2,000 people were killed by the virus in the deadliest outbreak seen in the DRC. No new Ebola cases have been reported in the northeast of the country since April 27th. For an outbreak to be declared officially over, there has to be no new cases reported for 42 days, which is double the incubation period of the virus. The latest outbreak was the 10th to have hit the country since 1976, when Ebola was first discovered. However, the DRC is now dealing with a fresh Ebola outbreak in the northwest of the country.
Dear countrymen, as we declare the end of this 10th epidemic, our country is facing its 11th, which was declared in Mbandaka, Equator Province, on May 31st, 2020.
And the World Health Organization sent a congratulatory message to the Democratic Republic of Congo for its successful fight against Ebola, but also recalled the importance of continued efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19 and to tackle measles.
Being targeted. While we celebrate the outbreak's end, we must resist complacency. In addition to COVID-19, the world's largest measles outbreak has wrought havoc in DRC, killing thousands of people in less time than Ebola took to claim. More than 3,400 victims during this latest outbreak.
Yes, which countries are seeing a continuing rise in numbers of cases? I mean, certainly South Africa is the country that's leading. As I said in my remarks, over 50% of the cases are there. And we also have a similar situation in Nigeria, increase in Cameroon, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in a number of countries where we are seeing, particularly after
Malawi's Electoral Commission is advancing with the vote count from Tuesday's historic rerun of last year's presidential election. Electoral authorities called on the population to remain calm as the count advances, adding that they have about a week to announce the official results. Nonetheless, the opposition Malawi Congress Party has already declared victory, as state broadcaster NBC claims that opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera is leading with 59% of the vote. Citizens headed to the polls for the second time in just over a year on Tuesday due to reported irregularities in the 2019 general election, in which current President Peter Mutharika was declared the winner.
Since the Commission has started receiving results, it has gone through them and is making its determinations. This is being done district by district in no order of priority. And the Commission appreciates how important it is to release the final results. And we are doing everything in our power to ensure that we are done with this process in good time. However, this will not be done at the expense of legality of the process and our quality control measures that we have put in place.
500,000 Senegalese school children have returned to class under instructions to wear face masks and keep a distance from each other. The government closed schools in mid-March in a bid to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus. Thursday's reopening sees over 500,000 children out of some 3.5 million in Senegal back in class, as only pupils who are sitting exams this year have returned. Other measures, such as the closure of universities and land and air borders, as well as a nighttime curfew, remain in place in the country.
I'm glad to be back in class because it's been a fair while since we've had classes, and that's not good for a school year. We've gone almost 3 months without coming to school, and that's very tricky for us final year students.
We are not stressed because we've been studying at home, and really we've had 4 months or 3.5 months of rest, but also of getting prepared, working and studying. And yes, we have just started classes again. We are very happy to be back in class.
Telesur English is now reaching more areas across the Caribbean. You can find us on the following channel under the following settings. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.